Your children could accidentally be disinherited if you pass away and your spouse gets remarried. That means your lifelong savings, the home that you and your family live in, and all the assets that you've worked for that you want to go down to your children could go to the new family if your spouse gets remarried. I'm going to show you the exact legal structure using a trust to make sure that your spouse can use the assets that you intended to be used for your family, but it protects the assets for your children so that when your spouse passes away, it goes to your children and not the new family's children. We'll cover the core conflicts related to blended family estate planning, why a will is going to fail your estate plan, and then the 3 clauses that you need to make sure to include inside of your trust to protect your assets and your children. Let's talk about the nightmare scenario. You trust your spouse completely, but it's not about trust. When you leave your surviving spouse your assets and they go and get remarried, your children could automatically be disinherited. And it's not going to be your spouse's intentions, it just accidentally happens. So what happens is you pass away, all of your assets go down to your surviving spouse, and then your spouse goes and gets remarried, and now they jointly own those assets with their new spouse. But the problem is going to be is that when they pass away, all of their assets go to the new spouse because they jointly own them together. And then when the new spouse passes away, all of the assets go down to their children, and your children are automatically disinherited. That's why it's very important to set up your estate plan in a way that your surviving spouse can use the assets to take care of your family, but those assets will not be able to go to the new family. They make sure that the assets go down to your children. So why does only having a will fail you? When you only have a will, the assets will give a lump sum distribution out to your surviving spouse, and then they have full ownership over those assets. So when they get remarried, all those assets will be jointly owned with the new spouse, and therefore it can go down to their children in the event that your spouse passes away before them. And the problem with the will is all you can do with it is outline the distribution of the assets and give a lump sum to your surviving spouse, and you have no control over how those assets get used, meaning you cannot control the distribution out to your children down the road when your surviving spouse passes away. The easiest way to structure this is using a revocable trust. When you put your assets inside the revocable trust, the trust controls those assets, and you can control distribution of those assets instead of giving a lump sum out to your surviving spouse. Which means that when your spouse passes away, you can keep the assets inside of that revocable trust, and you can use those assets to take care of the family. But when your surviving spouse passes away, those assets will still sit inside of that revocable trust, and you can use those assets to take care of your children instead of allowing those assets to be used by the new family. And if you set things up correctly, what you're going to be able to do is control how those assets get used inside of that trust, meaning they cannot sell the assets, they cannot gift those assets out, and they cannot change who's going to be inheriting those assets. So you can maintain full control over the management and distribution of those assets inside of that revocable trust and make sure that your children are taken care of. The other benefit of this is going to be that when you pass away and when your spouse passes away, those assets will sit inside of that revocable trust, and they will avoid the probate process at both points. And so your surviving spouse does not have to worry about going through the probate process for your assets, and then your children do not have to worry about going through the probate process for your surviving spouse's assets. Basically, the way people will typically set this up is they will allow the income from the assets to be used to take care of their family. Their spouse can pull that out, but then the principal of those assets will not be able to be taken out and used for the surviving spouse. They can keep it there for the children when the surviving spouse passes away. Let's talk about the 3 clauses that you want to make sure that you're including inside of your revocable trust document to give your children the best protection. The first one's going to be the HIM standard, and it basically means that the trustee can only distribute the principal of the assets inside of that revocable trust in the event that they need help with health, education, maintenance, and support. This will allow you to have a safety net for emergencies, but it prevents them from pulling out the principal of your assets for any other reason. The second one is going to be anti-commingling rule, so it prevents the assets or the income from those assets from being able to be considered as marital property when your surviving spouse gets remarried. That way, those assets inside the trust cannot be split up in a potential divorce settlement. And the third one's going to be a neutral trustee. So you need to make sure you're setting up the trustee for this revocable trust correctly. And the mistake that a lot of people make is they're going to make their spouse or their children the trustee of that revocable trust when they pass away. But this could create a conflict of interest if your surviving spouse is the trustee and they do get remarried and they have to balance the situation of having 2 families that they need to take care of. When you have a neutral third party as a trustee for that revocable trust for the assets going down to your kids, it makes sure that you maintain the impartiality, the proper tax handling, and then it protects the principal for your children. So if you want help setting up a revocable trust to make sure that your assets are going down to your children and they do not accidentally get disinherited if your surviving spouse gets remarried, click link in the bio, fill out the form, and schedule a time to talk to some on our team.